All right, welcome to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I am your host, Jordan Overturf, back from a little bit of a hiatus. We took a little bit of a break as we waited to see what was going to happen with the coronavirus response here in Texas. How do we need to adjust our course going forward? And we've pretty much got our plan worked out. We've got some candidates lined up to talk to us on the phone. So we'll be doing some phoner interviews as the weeks progress and we see what happens in terms of measures being taken to stop the spread, flatten the curve, do our part to make sure the coronavirus doesn't have more of an impact on our society than it already has. Last night, the governor talked about the need for Texans to unite in this effort and talked about the great will of the Texans who have helped respond, be it setting up these drive-through testing locations, the leaders at the Special Operations Center, Texas Department of Emergency Management. There have been so many people who are playing their part in this response and recovery effort at the state level, the county level, and at the federal level. We're doing our best to keep up with everything as it progresses, and we'd love to provide you some more information. We're working on getting policy experts to kind of outline what has happened in the past few weeks and what we can look forward to as we go through this process. What are some other legislative solutions that might come out of this response effort? How are we going to improve our system and things like that? But we've got a lot of time before we get there, and I've got a great guest who I actually sat down with before the primary, before coronavirus, before Super Tuesday, and everything kicked off. Sandra Whitten is the lone Republican who was running in Congressional District 28. She is fighting in a district that has got territory running from San Antonio down to the border in Laredo. She has since turned her effort to the coronavirus response and making sure that she is informing the people in CD 28 about all the things happening at the federal level. What is this stimulus plan that is being proposed? What's going on at the local level with food pantries, with local businesses doing their part to help support this response. A lot of coverage of the effort of truckers. Truckers are playing such a huge part in making sure that our grocery stores get repacked, that medical supplies are getting to the facilities that they need to, and that, it's just showing such an amazing part of how big the Texas economy is and how far it stretches all the way across this state. But I had a great time talking to Sandra. It's great to still hear, absent coronavirus, where her principles were before. Obviously, you can follow her on social media to see what she's been keeping up with as part of the coronavirus response. But this is our chat way back when, before we had to worry about things like this. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mrs. Sandra Whitten.
Thank you so much for having me. We're actually doing pretty well. We're kind of in a David and Goliath kind of situation a little bit, but things are going great. We're having a good response from the conservative base. And even we're already starting to bring over some crossovers and people who are just sick of seeing the exact same thing from their broken party in the Democratic side.
Yeah, this is a huge district. It's not as big as Texas 23, but Texas 28 spans a pretty good size of the state. How's it been, making your way throughout this district?
So we are actually number 2 in terms of size for the state of Texas. So yeah, we're big. We have 9 counties, and I spend a lot of time in the car, getting to all the different places, and meeting everybody. That one of the crazy things that people kind of like to overlook is really South Texas in general. A lot of what I've been doing this last year is getting the message out that, hey, South Texas is here. And, Texas couldn't be Texas without South Texas. We have the number 1 land port in the entire U.S. It was actually, for a little while over the summer, it was the number 1 port period in the U.S. And people completely overlook that. They have no idea what we have in South Texas. We're actually quite the jewel, not just for the state, but for really the country at large.
Well, and the Texas economy is so big and vast that I think people, just assume that it's all concentrated in one or a few parts of the state. So it's a shame that districts like Texas 28 get overlooked every now and then. So for people who don't know much about you, Sandra, can you take us just real quickly through your background and experience, that has prepared you for this race?
Sure, absolutely. So I get asked a lot, "Are you a lawyer?" And I always say absolutely not. So you can still like me. Our halls of justice are not so much the halls of justice, but the halls of law and legislation are full of lawyers, and lawyers kind of forget us sometimes. So anyway, I tell everybody the first and foremost thing I'm as a mom. I have 4 kids. My oldest is 15. My youngest is 1. I've worn a lot of hats. I've been in church leadership and youth director. I've been an 18-wheeler saleswoman. I've opened restaurants and stores and bars, and have helped people turn their businesses around with all of those things. I've been a government liaison for a subcontractor in the shipyards back in Virginia. I've been a Navy wife. I'm currently a Border Patrol wife. With the Border Patrol, I've helped create and supported family programs to help people, kind of like what we do in the military, just to kind of help people settle into their new area, make some friends, and realize that they've got a green family that loves them just as much as their biological family does back home from wherever they come from. I've also been very involved with the youth activities. I've been on the board for our local baseball league for 9 years. It's my 9th season. So I've been a coach, and I've also been a dance instructor. Investing in our kids is number one, and it's something that I've always made sure that I've been a part of my entire life. Even when I was a teenager, it was always investing in kids and letting them know that there's other options instead of just the norm.
Well, it seems like you've got a pretty strong leadership background there, but it's interesting to have someone who has seen things from both the military deployment side of things as well as the Border Patrol side of things. Do you feel like there's a lot of overlap between what those families go through?
Yes and no. So, when you're military, it's really easy to have that family created for you as soon as you join a command. And in fact, I remember every time we went to a new command, the first thing that he did was part of his checking in process was to bring in his wife. At the time we didn't have kids, so that I could get to know the command, and they, all leaders, all points of leadership for each command said, you are just as important as your sailor is. And I think that that's important, and I think that, and this is where we started creating these wives programs for the Border Patrol in the Laredo sector, was because we didn't have that. We were told that your family is important, but, law enforcement already has a high divorce rate, but Border Patrol, their divorce rate's actually a little bit higher because you get brought down to these little, you get families that come, we came from Virginia, for example, or you get families that come from upstate New York or Michigan or, fill in the blank, and then you put them in a little border town, and they kind of feel like, oh my gosh, not only was it a culture shock because it's not something that they've been used to, but then it turns into it's not something that I'm used to. The culture is completely different, and my agent's gone all the time, and I really didn't have anything that I could rely on because there wasn't that family culture there. So we said, let's bridge the gap, and we started just kind of creating these groups and stuff. And a few years back, when we did the first one, many of them had tried and failed because of different reasonings, but we were able to launch the first successful one and kind of took it to a national platform for the Border Patrol. And it was called a Border Patrol Family and Friends. And we did fundraisers and stuff because it was during a time when all of the Border Patrol funding had gotten slashed really bad during the Obama administration. So they were being asked to come to the schools, for career days and all those types of things. but they didn't have things that they could hand out to the kids anymore. The little bracelets and pencils and all those kinds of things. The budget wasn't there for it anymore. So we got together and said, let's do a fundraiser. So we did several fundraisers, but our big one was a big fall festival, and we were able to get the agents involved and get the commands involved, and it really created a unity. And we also were able to raise a lot of funds for them to be able to go into the schools and hand that stuff back out. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a successful event.
And it's interesting that you have experienced, Border Patrol on both sides of two very different administrations, right? I mean, under the current administration, what do you think has been the biggest difference in terms of border security?
So, it's kind of a twofold answer, but we'll start with the presidential side of it. President Trump has been fantastic in his support for Border Patrol, his support for the mission, and not just for the agents, but really for the agent families and stuff like that. I know that when he's come to McAllen and different things like that, unfortunately, when he was running, we happened to be out of town when he was in Laredo, but he took the time to make sure that people knew that they mattered to him. And so that was something that was not seen at all with the Obama administration. And we see a president who's actually listening to the agents. We see a president who's actually taking the threat seriously, and we didn't see that with Obama. Of course, we've seen for the last, let's just throw out a number and say 20 years, where everyone's saying, hey, we need tougher border security, well, longer than that. I mean, all the way back to the Clinton administration, people have been screaming that we needed border security, and it was a great talking point, but nobody wanted to do anything about it. Now we actually have a president who's not only wanting to do something about it, but is actually doing something about it.
So what is
under the Obama administration?
Well, what is what is the conversation like in the district then? Because we obviously know what the division is throughout the country when it comes to border security, but what are the folks who actually live in District 28 saying when it comes to border security?
We're getting a little bit of both sides of it. We're getting some that are completely for it. We're getting some that are saying, I don't really see where there's a crisis or a problem that's been being talked about until you start pointing out the exact examples. What I tell everybody is that, our district's 9 counties, and 4 of those counties are actually on the river. Well, the problem is like when you see something every single day, you just assume that it's normal, right? I mean, that's just common sense. So when you're driving down 35 or you're driving out 83 and you see an 18-wheeler pulled over with 45 to 90 people stuck in the back of it, well, just another day on the border. That's nothing new. But when you're up in San Antonio or you're up in New York State or fill in the blank and you hear about that on the news, you're like, what? 90 people in the back of an 18-wheeler? That doesn't sound normal. So part of it is being desensitive to what's happening on the border. But then when you start talking about it, you say, what was it wasn't just 90 people that was in the back of this 18-wheeler. Let's, for the sake of the argument, say 45 of those 90 people were minors. They're under the age of 18. So, and they didn't have a parent with them or a family member. So now we're talking about 45 kids who've essentially been sold from what presumably their parents thought they were going to have a better life. And in fact, the better life is they're actually getting sold into a sex slave ring, or, they're going to go and start running drugs or things like that. And when you start breaking it down so that people can digest it more, then they go, you know what? I had a cousin who's so-and-so, got hush money because they had seen something like that happen. And, those kind of conversations start coming up, and people then start realizing, you know what, maybe this really is a problem that's on our southern border. We've overlooked it for so long because that's just the price of living on the border, if you will. And so people are realizing, wait a minute, those are the things that are actually happening down here, and we've just been overlooking them. We still have people that are adamant that stuff is not happening. And then when you show them the video of, hey, this just literally happened on my front porch, and I live in Laredo, so how are you going to sit here and tell me what was were my eyes lying, or what's going on here? Is the camera making it up? So it's kind of exciting to be able to, I guess, be on the forefront of really getting the truth out about what's happening when it comes to those kinds of things. But at the same time, it's disheartening because people just have become so used to it that they didn't see it as a problem.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up human trafficking, because that's an issue that has been gaining more and more momentum, especially over the last couple of months. But it's also an issue that doesn't wholly involve just the border. I mean, this is a worldwide crisis. And I was just reading in the Houston Chronicle today, there's a young woman who's 21 years old who was trafficked while she was in high school in Katy. And she's actually going up to D.C., I believe today or in the next couple of days, to testify and talk to President Trump and, congressional leaders about the problem of human trafficking and how our children are being targeted. Are you shocked that there aren't more people taking up this cause, especially in D.C., where they have the power and the purse to be able to take on this issue?
You know, I wish I could say that I'm shocked by it, but I'm kind of not shocked by it. In fact, it's something that's easy for people to overlook when it's not their daily life. You know, the fact is that you can't make, and this is not a slide. It's because the Republicans and the Democrats are both guilty of this. So this is not a political slide to a certain party or even a specific person. But the mentality has always been that if we can't make money off it, if it can't donate to us, if it can't, something to that effect, if it doesn't benefit me, then why should I care? Well, it might not directly affect you, but it does directly affect you if it's happening to people that live in your district, if it's happening to American citizens. And as a person, if it's happening to another human being, we should stand up and say something. So, I'm not shocked by it. I'm as an American citizen, I'm outraged by it that nothing has been being done about it, and that it's having to take such, unfortunately horrific stories that are happening to young people and even old people. I heard it may have even been in the President's State of the Union address about the person in a sanctuary city who had been arrested and then let back out because it was a sanctuary city, so I couldn't pick them up because the city didn't report it. And then he turned around and violently raped a 90 or 92-year-old person. Mm-hmm. And so I applaud President Trump for actually listening to those stories, and not just listening to the stories, but taking them to heart and saying, look, this is not acceptable behavior. You want to talk about corruption and crime and this, that, and the third? Well, here it is slapping everybody in the face, and nobody's got, the strength or the willingness to take on this fight, but I will. Well, and I stand firmly with the president on that. Somebody's got to stand up for the little guy.
I know voters in Texas 28 are going to be happy to hear that, and especially Republican voters will have a chance on the March 3rd primary to vote on one of the ballot propositions supporting or opposing the continued building of a wall and using technology where it's applicable to increase our border security there. For you, what is a specific issue that you are passionate about and you are taking to the voters in Texas 28?
Well, of course, I mean, the national security and human trafficking aspect, I mean, that's number one to me. The next, if you will, is I've been really being a military family and veteran family, because my dad was in the service, my brother's been in the service, my granddad. I mean, we come from a long line of veterans. I've always teased, even before I decided to run, that if you cut me open, I actually bleed red, white, and blue, not just red. Because we just had a heart for patriotism in my entire family, and it's seeing the lack of care and respect for our veterans, and especially even our National Guardsmen. They really have a tough road to hoe. They get some benefits, but if you're a combat veteran, period, you should be allowed to have full benefits instead of just partial benefits, because there's a lot of not all wounds are visible, if you will. And we lose 22 veterans a day as the national average. And that's something that we need to pay more attention to. The president's done fantastic strides in fixing our VA system, but we still have a long way to go with it. There's still so many veterans that are not getting the care that they need because it's not available in rural communities. They have to drive, sometimes 2 to 3 hours in one district to be able to get a VA appointment. And that may or may not even happen because The VA system is still broken in places.
Yeah, does it seem disingenuous for so many Democrats to be pushing Medicare for all when we need to be properly funding the VA system so we can maintain that promise for the men and women who serve our country first before asking for a thing in return?
Well, I mean, and that's exactly it. You figure the VA takes care of about 3% of the population, and the Democrats want to do this health care for all concept. So we've had problems with the VA since its creation for the most part. They can't take care of 3% of the population as a government agency, and now we're going to ask them to take care of the whole 100%. I mean, how's that really going to look?
Yeah, I haven't seen any structure that seems to make sense to me, and clearly with the examples we have before us, there aren't any viable options out there. I know at this point you've got to be block walking your tail off, going to as many events as possible. When you're out there talking to voters, what is the number one issue for them, or maybe what is an issue that has surprised you that voters are talking about?
Oh gosh. First, healthcare has been a big one. People are concerned. They're worried about what's going to happen with their Social Security and things like that. And that's not just senior citizens. You have people, in their 30s that are going, hey, we've been paying into the system too. And is it even going to still be there by the time we get old enough to be able to use it? So it's things like that. And I keep telling everybody and this was actually something that got brought up in a debate earlier this week with healthcare. And I said, the problem is that we're talking about healthcare. That's not where the problem is. The problem is actually health insurance and how we're going to be paying for it. That's where the real problem is. So we need to actually target it in instead of painting, using a broad brush to paint the picture. By doing that, now we can actually say, okay, here's where we can start honing in on these problems. So I would definitely, I tell everybody we gotta use the proper terminology, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes also, is that we've got to make sure that we're using the right words so that we can address the problems correctly. So definitely health insurance and people paying for their medicines and procedures and things like that. It's a big problem that people are really concerned with. Down in the valley area of our district, which is the bottom four, counties, one of the big problems is one of our counties specifically doesn't have a medical treatment facilities.
Yeah.
There's no emergency room. There's not a 24-hour clinic. It's kind of I believe they have like a 9 to, if you will, a 9 to 5 kind of thing. And that's a failure of leadership. We have infrastructure problems. We have places in our district that can't get what they need. And our, Congressman Cuellar has actually told some of our judges and commissioners that, well, if you go out and hire yourself a good grant writer, then maybe we can help you. No, you're in office to help them anyway. So why don't you use one of your grant writers to help them write these grants to get the things they need, like, even in some places running water. And to an extent, those might be considered state or county problems, but at the end of the day, you're the leader of the pack as the elected official for our district. So these need to be concerns that are being addressed. So, and the other side of it is that they just feel like they don't have a voice and that they've been lost in the crowd because they really feel like their congressman doesn't listen to anything that his constituents have to say.
So, as you're talking to folks and they feel disenfranchised by, the current representation and the amount that the buck gets passed around at the congressional level, what is your message to folks in terms of persuading them, convincing them, making them realize that, voting for a Republican might be the answer to their problems, right? That voting Republican isn't what the mainstream media is. How are you having that conversation with voters in the district in order to convince them to support you?
So a lot of it is, as I tell everybody, let's take the R and the D off the table for just a minute. Let's talk about what's important to you. Let's talk about our values for just a minute. Let's talk about, do you like smaller taxes? Do you like big government or little government? Let's have the conversation about what that means. Are you pro-life? Do you love your guns? Do you love the fact that, we here in South Texas, we're a very faith-driven community. And so these are things that resonate with people. And when you tell them, did you know that the Democrat Party actually denounced God back in their, I believe it was the 2012 convention? They have no respect at all for the people. They just want to be able to say, here's some free stuff. And everyone goes, oh, I love free stuff. Like, who doesn't go to a fair and, run past all the gravity tables, But we forget that at the end of the day, it's not free. We're actually paying for it. And so when we start having those conversations and when you really start talking about government funded is never free. Government funded is taxpayer funded. Government funded is your dollars at work. So why are we paying for all of these quote unquote free programs that you're not even benefiting from? You're not even qualified from. Let's cut back the spending. Let's hone in on what the Constitution says that the Congress should be paying for instead of making all of these social problems government problems, because they're not. When you start having just regular common sense conversations like that, people start realizing, you know what, I'm actually a Republican because I disagreed with everything that you said. Why didn't I know this before? So it's really just been a fun educational process, if you will, in teaching people what the Republican values and platform is really about, because they've not been given that fair opportunity to hear about it before.
Well, and I appreciate you coming on and clearly and concisely putting that argument together. It sounds like, as Republicans go forward, we need to be having more and more of these conversations and not get caught up in, the defense of the president or the party in general, and really speak to the values that drive us. Because at the end of the day, isn't that ultimately what will guide your decisions if you're elected to Congress, right? Your values are the guiding principles.
Absolutely. I tell everybody the two things that I will always use as my compass is the Bible and the Constitution. Of course, the Constitution was written with biblical principles, so we should be pretty safe there, right? We and this is something, and you watch the news just like I do. We all know that there's plenty of Republicans that are rhinos that need to go also. I believe in term limits. I believe that, we have to hold people accountable. I believe that people get too comfortable taking their sweet time in Congress instead of going in there to get a job done and move on to the next thing. You're not supposed to be there for a life sentence. You're supposed to be there to serve the people and then move on to the next thing. So, having those conversations with people and letting them know that, hey, there really is something different. And I mean, honestly, I've got nothing to gain. And I tell people that because I really don't. I have not sought after any huge endorsements. I've not sought after, any huge dollars. Not that we don't need them. I mean, what campaign doesn't need them? But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to win the people. I'm here to be the voice for the people. And in order to do that, I'd rather spend more time with the people than more time with the powers that be that are causing the problems in the first place. So, you really have to have a patriot's heart to have that kind of conviction, I guess, if you will. And that's not just to speak proudly or anything like that. It's just we need to not make it about me and make it about we. And I don't see where that's the common theme in politics any longer. It's about I just want to get to my next status and then I can either sit here and sit pretty or I can try and go on for my next ambitions, instead of having that servant heart, which is exactly why we call our elected officials public servants. So when we, the only thing I have done is lost my family time and, my own personal time and money. And it's not a loss to me if we are making a difference for our country. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Excellent. Well, if people want to learn more about you and your candidacy, here's a great chance to plug your website, social media. Where can people go to find out more about the campaign?
Absolutely. So you can find us on social media at Sandra for Texas, not the number, the word FOR. And then my website is also sandrafortexas.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. And, let's look down the road and see about bringing you back when you got a bigger fight on your hands in November, and we can talk a little bit more about the issues that voters are concerned about at that time.
That sounds great. I really appreciate you, Jordan. Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye. All right. Thank you again to Sandra for joining us. Thank you to you for listening and continuing to follow all of our candidate interviews. We will be bringing you more of those in the coming weeks. We've got interviews scheduled, so don't worry. We will continue the conversation, and we'll try and keep it as timely and relevant as possible moving forward. So that way we're covering the topics that are around the kitchen table right now. And right now that conversation is coronavirus. If you didn't see, the governor did issue an executive order that had some pretty sweeping effects, closing down restaurants and bars. You can still do to-go delivery orders, but dine-in services are now nixed. The governor also allowed the sale of to-go mixed drinks, beers, all kinds of alcoholic beverages, so that way those bars and industries can continue to provide those services and reap the benefits of that. We'll continue to follow the response as best we can, providing details through the Texas Young Republicans page on Facebook. Make sure you're following us there. If you want to make sure and catch all of our episodes, make sure you follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. And if you are looking forward to information about the Republican Party, I know everyone's putting campaigns and politics and all that stuff aside right now, or at least doing their level best. We assure you that we're going to be picking up the political effort in due time. But right now, the focus is providing resources and information as best we can about the response. So if you want to find out more, again, Texas Young Republicans on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs. Also, if you haven't had a chance, listen to the Republican Party of Texas podcast. It's called Let's Talk Texas. It's myself, Chairman James Dickey, sitting down to talk about the news and politics of the week and kind of what those implications are. So we'll be providing regular updates about the postponement of state and county conventions, what all that means, what we have to look forward to in the coming weeks. But thank you again. Make sure you hit subscribe, leave us a rating, do all of that fun stuff. I really do appreciate everyone who is engaged and helped make this podcast such a great success for Texas Young Republicans. Until next time, friends, we'll see you down the road.